The reason that World Can't Wait wanted to pull this, there's choices. We did one yesterday on the U.S. drone war and on Guantanamo, the ongoing hunger strike, and the necessity of stopping the U.S. doctrine of indefinite detention and targeted assassination. The third point here, I think, is just as important, and that is the role of people who are not just knowing from the inside what's going on and reacting as human beings and not as cogs in the machine, but doing and saying something about this. So we wanted to bring these very crucial examples of people who have been targeted by the U.S. government. And we had the opportunity to also add in the Bradley Manning story, which I know a lot of you are familiar with, but we have Kevin Gustola here. He was at the first week of the court-martial this week, and he's going to be able to give his insight as somebody who's been, I say this fondly, obsessively covering Bradley Manning for the last couple of years. In fact, 2 years ago, we did the first workshop at the Left Forum on Bradley, and we did it on a day, I don't know if you remember this, Kevin, but people were actually in the streets in Quantico in front of the base protesting. We were stuck here at the Left Forum because we had already agreed to do a workshop, and it was the kind of the beginning of Twitter, and we were getting tweets from Quantico and sharing them live. And so this has been an intense, important 2 years. Thomas Drake is going to be presenting to us, and his story alone could take up several hours and books, and it is an extremely important example of someone standing up to the NSA and telling the truth about what was going on even before we knew about the latest revelations. And Jesselyn is somebody that I followed only online from years ago when she spoke out about the treatment of John Walker Lynn at the beginning of the U.S. Assault on Afghanistan. And they're going to tell their stories or what they want to bring to us. Kevin will come in on Bradley Manning, and then we will open it up for discussion. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Jesselyn's going to start.
Hi, I'm Jesselyn Radack. I am an attorney with the Government Accountability Project. I am both a whistleblower and someone who represents whistleblowers. A lot of people may not know what that word means exactly. It gets thrown about a lot. But it's basically someone who has a reasonable belief that what he or she sees evidences fraud, waste, abuse, illegality, or danger to public health and safety. Very briefly, my story, you can read about it instead of me reciting it all, but I had been the ethics advisor at the Justice Department shortly after 9/11 when I got a call about them wanting to interrogate an American named John Walker Lynn. Some of you may be too young for this to even ring a bell. He had counsel and he was being held by both the military and FBI and CIA in Afghanistan. He was actually the first prisoner in the Afghan war. And like I always would advise in this situation, when you have an American, no, you can't interrogate him without a lawyer. And he already had a lawyer. That was on a Friday. I got a phone call on Monday like, oops, we did that anyway. It was also pretty clear that there was torture going on because there was a picture of him circulating worldwide. It looked a lot like what we later saw at Abu Ghraib. On Monday I said, okay, you can use the information you got from him for intelligence gathering, but not for a criminal prosecution. Sure enough, the government, of course, tried to prosecute him, did prosecute him. I inadvertently found out about a discovery order to turn over my email chronicling that the FBI had made an ethics mistake, and all my emails were gone from the file. I resurrected them from my computer archives. I wrote a memo to my boss. I attached a copy of all the missing emails, and I made a copy in case they disappeared again, and I resigned. I gave them to my boss. I don't know what she did. I had resigned. I was in a new job. Yet I kept hearing over and over on the radio, like, oh, John Walker Lynn never had a lawyer. And finally I just picked up the phone and called one of the journalists on NPR and said, he did, and I have the documents to prove it. This guy is facing 3 death penalty counts. And I gave the information to journalist Mike Isikoff, who was in Newsweek. He published it. The case soon crashed afterwards because the whole case turned on the integrity of his interrogation and whether it could be used. On the day of a suppression hearing, he pled guilty to 2 minor technical infractions. So I thought my role in this whole thing is over. But no, it had only just begun because I didn't know that I had unleashed the full force of the entire executive branch, and they were pissed. For me, just a few highlights were being put under a federal criminal investigation for a number of years, being referred to the state bars in which I'm licensed as an attorney, and being put on the no-fly list. This kind of retaliation continued over a number of years. In fact, I only found out only yesterday, the DC bar finally, 10 years later, dropped its investigation of me. Anyway, as bad as my story was, I decided, you know what, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to representing whistleblowers because this is bullshit and people should not have to go through this for telling the truth. You should not have to choose your conscience over your career. But then, for all I went through, as bad as it was, at least I never got indicted. So as an attorney, when I read that the Obama administration, which had been elected on a platform of openness and transparency and commitment to whistleblowers, had arrested and indicted someone for leaking what sounded like very valuable information for the public to know, I knew that we had crossed the Rubicon. I knew this was uncharted territory because as much as I was investigated, it was not fun, but I was not arrested. I was not indicted. So I didn't know what to, I do what I normally do. I write op-eds and circulate them widely and hope that they are a beacon for someone who might need the information in them. So I wrote an op-ed for the LA Times about the difference between leaking and whistleblowing. Leaking serving no purpose other than to usually try to harm someone, and whistleblowing serving the public good. I put that out there, and luckily, because I put that article out there, someone close to Tom had read that article, and Tom ended up getting in touch with me. I ended up defending, or on the whistleblower part of it, defending Tom's case, and he was indicted under the Espionage Act for allegedly mishandling classified information. If you haven't heard much about the Espionage Act, it's because it's a little used 1917 law that is meant to go after spies, not whistleblowers. Yet the Obama administration had done this very bizarre thing that had not been done since Nixon, and used the Espionage Act to go after someone who, just from the bare facts that I read in the newspaper at the time, was clearly, sounded like a whistleblower to me. I represented Tom through this absolutely brutal process, and I was hoping this was a bizarre one-off by the Obama administration. I still kept hoping and hope, despite the fact that he had done a lot of anti-transparency, anti-open government, anti-good government things by that point in 2010. Tom's case, and he'll talk about it in more detail, ended up collapsing in spectacular fashion because he had never leaked anything. He wasn't even really charged with leaking, despite what all the newspapers said and still get wrong today. He was charged with retaining information that the government claimed was classified. It turned out it was all unclassified. The government seized it from his house and stamped it classified retroactively. That's like driving 20 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour speed zone, and the next day they lower it to 5 miles an hour, and they give you a ticket because yesterday you were going the limit, 20 miles an hour. It's Obviously, that's why we don't have ex post facto laws in this country. I hope Tom's case was a one-time thing, but it was not. There have since been 6 prosecutions of people under the Espionage Act who have been accused of mishandling supposedly classified information. The most notorious is probably Bradley Manning, whose case is in progress right now. Trial just began last week. One of the only reporters dutifully, amazingly covering all of the pretrial and covering the trial has been Kevin Gostola. Alexa O'Brien has also been covering it, and about 3 other people who Kevin will probably remember the names of better than me. But it is one of the most, I know we're early into the 21st century, but I feel it's one of the most important cases it will be one of the most important ones of this century, definitely of this decade. And not that some people are paying attention, but our whole country should be paying attention. Because whether or not you like Bradley Manning, or whether or not you like Julian Assange, the government's arguments in this case are so incredibly broad and so incredibly dangerous that every press outlet and every American should be shaking in their boots and shaking their fists and yelling, because the government is arguing that because information that Bradley Manning has admitted to being a part of getting put on the internet, because some of that information supposedly ended up in the hands of someone we don't like, in this case Osama bin Laden, but given the breadth of who our country doesn't like, it can be pretty easy for them to peel off information from the internet from something I wrote in my blog, or that you wrote, or that Tom or Kevin writes all the time. Because that ended up in the hands of an enemy, Bradley Manning is responsible for aiding the enemy. It's such a dangerous charge. I mean, if you look at the logical extension of that, if Osama bin Laden happened to have a copy of the New York Times, then the publisher, the newspaper, its reporters, its sources, all of them could be prosecuted for aiding the enemy and for espionage, and that is frightening. We have a First Amendment, which includes freedom of the press. A lot of people kind of forget the press part and the part about your right to petition Congress for redress of grievances. Obama has now, not only has he gone after 6 people under the Espionage Act, and I always said, he's gone after more people under that than all previous presidents combined. He stole my line and made it part of his re-election, a plank of his re-election campaign. I've prosecuted more leakers than anyone else. So he has no problem with this. Meanwhile, what you're seeing today, this firestorm you're seeing today, is because of leaks. Leaks massively, probably the biggest leak I would say since WikiLeaks, that Glenn Greenwald of The Guardian has been bringing forth as a journalist. So I think now the only person that the United States government hates as much as Julian Assange and WikiLeaks is Glenn Greenwald and The Guardian and whoever the source is for Glenn Greenwald. This has been unfolding over the weekend, and they've already opened a criminal investigation into whoever the source is and into Glenn himself. I have always said that the war on whistleblowers is also a war on journalists. They appear in every single indictment. A number of them, including Jim Risen, has been subpoenaed, Jim, 3 times to testify against his source. And I think it's a backdoor way of creating an Official Secrets Act, which we don't have in this country. You may think that sounds like an exaggeration, but if you read the anti-leak legislation put forth by Cardin and others, it basically would be an Official Secrets Act. So what you are seeing, finally, Tom Drake and 3 other NSA whistleblowers I represent have been shouting to anyone who would listen to them, shouting into the wilderness for the past 3 years after Tom's case collapsed, shouting. The government is doing mass sweeping dragnet surveillance domestically of all Americans' digital data. Not just telephone calls, all digital data. Your phone calls, your emails, your credit card statements, your bank statements, your tweets, your instant messages, your email, your phone calls. I can't even begin, they can banking, I think I said that one, but they can basically see what is on your desktop. Think about that. And even if you have nothing to be ashamed of, or you have nothing to hide, that is an incredible invasion of your privacy. Even if you do a totally, if you look at my search on WikiLeaks, I look like a terrorist. Because I do national security and human rights, I'm typing in Al-Qaeda every day, terrorism, pressure cooker bomb, occasional things about like, why do men have nipples, because my teenagers ask me. I look like a total perverted terrorist if you look at my Google search. So I look like a terrorist for basically. So, in other words, you cannot, whether you're looking at the envelope information on the data, that was the White House's first excuse when it got caught, doing this a few days ago. It said, oh, don't, I was on a show with Fran Townsend, she's like, don't worry, they're only looking at, the number who it's to and from and how long it lasted, and that's it. And I said, well, first of all, the metadata, what we call metadata, that kind of transactional data, tells me a lot more about you than any content that you've written. It tells me who you're associating with, how often. It tells me how much you're talking to them. I can go layers deep on who you know, and who you're calling, and who you're communicating with, and who you're associating with, also part of the First Amendment, freedom of association. But then, like right during the segment with Fran Townsend, Wolf Blitzer is like, wow, breaking news from the Washington Post. They're getting content too. So, again, my clients have been saying it for years. I am grateful that we finally have tangible proof of that. And it gives me a glimmer of hope that I see people really finally reacting, that this is completely inappropriate, un-American, unconstitutional, illegal, anti-democratic, and you don't do this kind of thing in a free and open democratic society if you want to stay that way. So I'm going to yield to, I guess, Tom next, and he can tell you more about his story.
Thanks, Jesselyn.